Welcome. This video interview is part of the USMC VTA History Project. We're recording today on September 11, 2025 at the VTA Reunion in San Diego, California. The goal of these interviews is to capture the stories and experiences of our association members from their Vietnam experiences. And could we start out? Can you give us your full name?
My name is Donald Ray Bennett. I was a Marine from 1946, 45. In 1940, I sold newspapers at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego, and lived in some government housing in Pacific Beach. We came from Oklahoma to San Diego, and my dad worked for the federal government in repairing refrigeration and air conditioning units. So he was very busy here in San Diego as the area expanded for factories, etc. I was in the 6th grade, and when we arrived in 1943, and I enjoyed going to the 5th and 6th grade here, and I sold newspapers at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. I started 1 or 2 days and went to Camp Callan, which was an Army camp up here above La Jolla and up the coast above La Jolla ways. And then the fellow also had afternoon sales of newspapers at the mess hall at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. Well, that fit me much better. And so I talked him into letting me sell newspapers at the Recruit Depot, San Diego. And they got a little pass for me. I left the 5th and 6th grade and walked over to the bus and which was about a block and a half away, and I took the bus to MCRD Gate 4, got off the bus, I had a badge, and I went to the mess hall where I set up my newspapers. And that was my introduction to the Marine Corps. And I saw some real squared away, good guys, and I was very impressed. Well, as I got into junior high school, and I was all of 15 going on 16, very close, they started a Marine Reserve unit in San Diego, California at MCRD. And it was tanks. And that sounded exciting. And my best friend, Dad, he was the only child in the family, and his dad got drafted. And anyway, he went with me, plus 2 kids that went to the Catholic school, and the 4 of us joined the Marine Reserves. The only problem was that I said I was 17, and I was really 15, and became a United States Marine in a tank unit. And what type of tanks they have at MCRD San Diego? They had M4 tanks, and they had a 5-man crew and a 75 millimeter Hauser gun and a 5-man crew, and they would let us drive those tanks on Saturdays if we came down, and whoever was on duty, the regular member of the staff, we could get 2 or 3 of the tanks and drive them in a rather large area they had available. And that was fun. So I went to the summer camps and made sure that I got there a week or so ahead of time. They had details they needed to send to Tank Pendleton to clean up the tanks that the regulars were letting us reserves use. And so I went up and did the dirty duty of cleaning them up and help get the ammunition that we was going to fire on the range and those things set aside. So here I would get a couple of weeks of active duty besides the 2 weeks that they had the reserve meeting or exercise for training. And then they had to clean up the tanks and give them back to the regulars. Well, they would be dirty, filthy tanks when I got them, but when I turned them back to them, they wanted them spit shined. And anyway, I would get about 4 weeks of extra active duty and got to know all of the, a lot of tankers, in other words. So that didn't hurt things. In June of 1950, I graduated out of La Jolla High School, and 15th, I believe it was, of June of 1950, the North Koreans attacked South Korea. And on the 30th of June, I was on active duty as with the rest of the reserves. Now, I'd had all of this experience of going to Camp Pendleton 4 times and having training and driving the tanks down at MCRD. Had a lot of actual good experience. So they used me. So when we was on active duty, and the war on, and I'd done my time in a little over a year overseas, got frozen feet and frozen hands at the Chosin Reservoir when the Chinese surrounded us in the mountains, and I had the last vehicle to make it out of the mountains. There was a bridge that they had blown that fed 2 huge reservoirs water down several thousand feet to generators that give power in the areas up there. And that was an experience to be involved. And they had I wished I had the picture. The Chinese, after the Marines had got up in the mountains, the Army took all of the good area and sent the Marines up into the mountains. And they were 4,000 to 5,000 feet high in the areas. And we had a lot of fun fighting the Chinese. But when they came in the war and we was all up in the mountains, they blew a bridge. And this bridge was over the pipes that took the water from these reservoirs, 2 huge reservoirs, down into the low grounds where the generators were that fed electricity to the upper parts of North Korea. First place, they flew over the bridge, the Air Force did, and took pictures of the bridge and a hole that was there, and they dropped a section that could be put in that hole, and we could drive across it. The only problem was when we put it in, it was 4 feet too short. So then there was quite a bit of traffic over the radios, and they dropped us a bunch of material, and our engineers added, and basically we come up with 4 to 5 feet more on each side of this bridge that it went over what they'd have blown up, and that gave extra capability of holding the tanks up. So I ended up being the last tank to go across that bridge. And they asked me to stay there, the engineers did, until they got the orders to blow the bridge. And I stayed with them. And it was about, I would say 3 o'clock in the morning, and they come and told me that they was going to blow the bridge. And we'd been just Chinamen on the other side, and they were shooting at us every once in a while. So I got ready to move out, and they blew that bridge and went by me, and they had just enough room to get a Jeep by the tank sitting in the little road going down the mountain on the side that was on the across the little bridge, and I followed the Jeep the way ahead of me somewhere. And when I got down into the flat ground, I found an Army unit in the middle of a river, but it was kind of like a mountain out there, maybe 20 feet high, and they were up on top of this item that was about the size of 10 or 15 rooms. And I asked him about 8:39 when I run into him if we hadn't had to sleep for a couple of days, and I told him that we would stay there with them, and they would have a tank, and we needed to get sleep. So I asked him to wake me up at about 8 o'clock in the night. So we got quite a good sleep. We got up and we headed for the ocean. And the next day, we ended up getting to the ocean, and here was all of these ships that were loaded. They was LSTs, and they was supposed to leave in 30 minutes, and told me I was lucky, and shifted a bunch of equipment around. And at high tide, I floated out of there, and 8 days later, I was at the bottom of Korea and was landed. I was a young tank commander, a sergeant in the reserves, and I served well for a year, came back, and what did they do with me? I had never been to boot camp. I was in a reserve unit. They sent me down to be a drill instructor. And so I learned that right. I knew how to march and so forth and so on. I became a drill instructor, and after a couple years of being a drill instructor, they sent me out for other types of duty. But I did enjoy that. After the war ended in Korea, I got regular duties in the tank battalion, and I decided I ought to stay in and to not be a reserve on active duty. So I went into the regulars, and so I was a staff sergeant, and they all at once, my data rank of being a staff sergeant wasn't the 3 years or 4 years I've been on active duty. It was the day I re-enlisted. So I lost all this seniority. And 9.5 years later, I made gunnery sergeant. Wow, it was right. And so that was a long, miserable duty. I got to go overseas once, but I went on recruiting duty and did most outstanding. I went to a place, I had it all fixed. I was going to come to San Diego and be down in the post office, downtown San Diego. And I went to recruiter school, and when they read that I was going to San Diego, well, I knew that. But I was not going to the location that I thought I was going to go to. And I had it all set up that I was going to go downtown San Diego and be a recruiter there. They sent me, they sent me to Salt Lake City, my daughter tells me. And in Salt Lake City, I found that the recruiter there, the Army recruiter, had been there for 17 or 18 years. And he was starting to put kids in from people that he'd put in way back when he first got there. And they had really shipped some low-quality individuals into the Marine Corps. So I went around and I told everybody I was only going to take quality. And it took me 3 months to get that first man. And I went around to all of the schools in the area. And I just kept going further and further out, seeing the vice principals. And if there was a Marine there who was a teacher, I also wanted to say hi to him, that I was a recruiter, and ask him to only send me quality. It took me 3 months to put my first man in. And he was quality. And about 2 months after that, for some reason, I got 3. And the next month, nobody. And then every month thereafter, I put in 4, 5, 6. I was a recruiter of the year. Yeah. And I had people graduating out of recruit training that was picking up PFC at the time. That was for the good recruits. And anyway, I did real good on recruiting duty and enjoyed it in Ogden, Utah. And that was not a spot that I would have picked out. I was in Mormonville, and they don't drink nor smoke, etc. And of course, I did a little of both of those. So I then did other, I come back to Tank Battalion at Pendleton and served. And 3 years, I found myself becoming a master sergeant. And went from gunny to master sergeant. And I was only a master sergeant for 1 month. And they made me a second lieutenant because there was a war going on now in Vietnam. And that war in Vietnam, I was a platoon leader. And I knew a lot about tanks. And before I knew it, I was a first lieutenant and a company commander, and enjoyed being the boss and making decisions on how we fought and how we used the tanks. But after that assignment, I ended up being given to the Navy as a combat cargo officer for 8 ships. And these 8 ships, I was the one that flew in and met with the people that we were picking up and determined where they was putting all of their equipment on what ship, etc. And then I would send the message back to the Commodore, and only twice in my 4 to 5 years I served in that calling did I have any change at all, and they were minor, very minor. So the Commodore used me. I picked up captain in the Marine Corps. I was a happy camper. I had some very good duties. I worked for an admiral, and I ended up being a Marine, stuck with working with the Navy, for the Navy, and enjoyed that. One time I was given a letter by a major general in the Marine Corps to deliver to another major general or lieutenant general. And I did that. And of course, I was not to look at the letter. And I was not to have any knowledge of what was there. And I still don't know. But it was important enough that they traveled me several hundred miles because the admiral wanted it, this other admiral to have some papers I was carrying and a message, verbal message that I was given. And I did that kind of work for the Navy and enjoyed it. I worked for the Marine Corps. When they reverted back to a smaller service, they kept 10 or 11% of us former sergeants as officers. And I was one of those that was kept as an officer. And I then, things got pretty hard. I was a captain for quite a while. And then I made major. And as a major, I had some more assignments with the Navy. And I actually stood on a bridge as one of the two officers on the flag bridge and give orders. Of course, we always made sure that the Navy man was a year or so ahead of me and when we got promoted to that rank. But I stood a lot of watches, which was an interesting switch for a Marine. I enjoyed my time in the service. Where did they send me? They sent me back to where I was a recruiter as an enlisted man, Utah, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. That was the area that I was in charge of. So I had some interesting assignments, and I got a set of orders, or I was going to get a set of orders because I was being told to go to Okinawa. And I called ahead to get the information, and I wanted to get on the housing where I was going on Okinawa. And they had, the Air Force had, maybe a year before I got my orders, had increased a huge, the Navy and the Air Force, amount of personnel in the area of Okinawa that I was going to. And they told me it would take 8 months to a year before I could get housing. Well, I decided that was the same as being shipped overseas, and I went ahead and filed my papers. I would have loved to stayed and made lieutenant colonel and give them another 5 or 6 years. But I got out with 28 and a half years of service, and was happy to do that, and went to work for a brother of mine who had a refrigeration and air conditioning company in San Diego. And he had all of the 7-Eleven stores and some of the Safeways on a contract. I paid X number of dollars and per store. And if something went wrong, we sent a technician in. We replaced the item or got it functional. And that was my job as the head of the maintenance, and very active for a good period of time. My only problem was one day, we started having financial problems. My brother had gotten sick, and at first he only came in 4 days a week. And then pretty soon it was 3 days, and it got down to 1 day a week. And we had a Filipino accountant, and I think he was crooked. He had 9 people working for him, and they were all from the Philippines, and I couldn't nail them. But one day I went to buy something, and my credit card was no good anymore. And I decided, and I tried to save the company, but I was unable to do that. My brother was too sick and not capable of handling it. So I went into retirement, retired, and left it basically at that. The tank that we received for the Marine Corps was a M26. It had a 90 millimeter cannon. It, I think, had a 500 or 600 horsepower motors. It was a real jewel of a tank, and that's what we had supported the people that was up in the Marines that were up in the mountains. We didn't get to go out and train with the new tanks we'd picked up, which was the M26, and it had a very wonderful turret, very improved radios. In fact, it was just a really good tank, and it was very wide, so you wasn't near as apt to fall off of something. The road to the Chosin Reservoir, or the top of the mountains there, was very small and were made for a truck, not a wide tank. And this caused us problems all the time. But we gradually, with the regular troops, Marine troops, fought our way, or they gave up land and tried to hold on as long as they could up there. And gradually, we were the ones that held the last bunch. We held the area while the last trucks and et cetera run across the bridge and down into the valley. And before we got a chance to go and get out, we were attacked heavily by the Chinese. And the Chinese had pretty well stopped us. I listened to the 2 lieutenants that were left. There was 5 officers in the company when we started, and we only had 2 left, and they were arguing on what they were going to do, and it was to get the men out. And the 1 lieutenant wanted to take the 7 or 8 tanks that was left and go way up north and come back down. He had an idea like that. And the other lieutenant, who I worked for, he said, we just abandon the tanks and get out of here while we can. Well, we couldn't get by a tank that was down in the valley area, and that's why the one lieutenant wanted to take and go way up north and try to come back that way. But my lieutenant said, we'll abandon tanks. And we did. And we walked up and went across the bridge. And then we happened to all at once see two tanks, and how they got by and how these kids got them, I had no idea. But as soon as they got down closer to where we was at, we was going to go try to get some help towards where the tanks we had left. And here these two come driving. How they got around, I never could find out. But they had gotten around, and the one that was following my tank, one of them was my tank, and I stopped it. And there was just one kid, and he was driving a tank. And another one was following him, another kid, and he was driving the other and went around. But they had both picked up some men, and when they got to the bridge, they got all the men that they could haul. And when I got to the bridge, I was the last one, and they asked me to stay there and support the engineers and what have you until they'd got everything out. And so I did. And then when they'd got everything out, and all that was left was, I want to call them Seabees, engineers, Navy, and they had planted charges to blow the bridge. And I told them it was their call as when they did it. And about an hour later, they come and told me they were blowing it up. And they went whirling by me in their Jeep. And that's when I went all alone down out of the mountains. And I got to a river in the bottom of the valley. And it was just like a mountain out in the middle of a river, about 4 or 5 feet high above the water line. Then the people that was in the tank was on fire. I pulled up and bumped him. And the people inside that had their hatch still closed, they opened the hatch and come out of the tank and got over into my tank, and we saved their rear ends. Wow. All at once over the tank infantry phone, a guy was talking to me and told me he was behind me on the tank infantry phone, and I let him in the escape hatch. I moved the tank and had him crawl up to the front, and then we'd move it up till he was being exposed, and then he would crawl up to the front, and he did that 3 times or 4 times before we opened up the hatch and brought him in.
Were you ever injured?
Was I ever injured?
Yes.
Not badly. No, I was lucky. I just lived a very spatial life, and I came back, and I had a family. I ended up with 6 daughters and 1 son. And the daughter that's with me was an identical twin. Wow. And she's looks after Dad still and Mother. I married my high school sweetheart. I came back, and she did accept my invitation to be my wife. And that's kind of the history that I had. And she's still alive. I left her in bed this morning. Donna had talked to her on the phone. At 94, pushing 95, my memory train disappears occasionally.
What other story?
I spent 28 and a half years of active duty in the Corps, and I had spent 4 years reserve time as a reserve before we got called to active duty. And I graduated out of high school on June the 25th of 1950 and was called on active duty before the end of the month, August of 1950. Well, I had the privilege of serving in the Marine Corps with the Navy. I was a combat cargo officer with the Navy.
Talked about that
A couple times, and that was really interesting. I was a recruiter. I worked for an admiral. I just had good luck and hope that a lot of other young fellas had good luck. I did say prayers, and most of my prayers were answered. And that's is my advice to any young man that goes to war: leave the bottle of whiskey back at the training area, because you need to be sober and know what you're asking the Lord for the help you're asking. But you need to make decisions that's well thought out and discussed with other people that you respect, and be able to retire as I did and draw a retirement check. And I still draw a retirement check as a major. Every month it comes through the mail, and that's great. And I don't regret it. And I'm not a college graduate, I'm a high school graduate.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your stories with us.
Well, I appreciate your thanking me for my service in the Marine Corps and working for the Navy and working for whoever I was sent to work with and for. I've been a happy camper and enjoyed being a United States Marine and a citizen of this country. Amen.